300 guests watched my husband take the stage and turn our marriage into a punchline. "Let's get this started with a bid of $20, he announced, smirking as if he just delivered the wittiest line of the century. "Who's interested in this worthless wife?" The ballroom exploded with laughter, rolling through the chandeliers like a wave that had been given permission to drown me. A paddle shot up near the bar, just to keep the joke rolling. I stood frozen in the sapphire gown I had chosen specifically for that evening, and I refused to cry. I refused to scream. I simply held his gaze. Then a voice from the farthest corner of the hall said, $2 million. The room went dead silent. This is the story of how I got there, standing on a small platform in front of everyone I knew. It wasn't a single moment. It was a slow erosion over 27 years, one tiny surrender at a time, until I had become so comfortable with being invisible that I barely registered the night it became official. I had orchestrated that entire gala. The centerpieces, the seating plan, the frantic calls to the caterer who kept botching the entree count, that was all me. I'd been doing it for over a decade, ever since Gregory's charity had outgrown backyard barbecues and required a full-blown production. I told myself I didn't need a standing ovation. That some people are the architects and others are the spotlight, and I had long accepted my role in that equation. Gregory strolled in 40 minutes late, as usual, flashing that practiced smile that made the whole room rearrange itself around him. He brushed a kiss on my cheek in front of the board members, mumbled something about how I always pulled it together, and then spent the next hour collecting accolades for decisions I had made alone, down to the vintage of the wine. I used to resent it. But by last year I had grown numb to it. You would be amazed at what the human spirit can tolerate. The jabs started during dinner, like they always did after he had downed a few glasses of his premium scotch. He teased the table about my old-fashioned habits, balancing a checkbook with a pen and paper, sending texts shorter than a headline. Everyone laughed. I smiled because it was expected, and passed the breadbasket to Mrs. Alderman, who squeezed my hand with such pity that it strung worse than Gregory's barbs. "She's the most boring woman in this room," Gregory announced, loud enough for 3 tables to hear. "And I say that with love." He always added with love, as if that phrase was a receipt that validated the transaction. I don't remember exactly who proposed the auction. I think it was Tom, his business partner, who loved organizing these charity bachelor events, all in good fun, all for a good cause. Someone suggested doing it with married couples. Gregory thought it was brilliant. I remember him grabbing my hand mid-dessert, dragging me onto the small stage set up for the band. For a split second, I thought maybe he intended to make a toast, to say something kind, something real. Instead, he snatched the microphone from the bandleader, placed a heavy hand on my shoulder like I was a piece of furniture, and uttered the words that shattered 27 years of willful ignorance. "Let's start at $20. The crowd roared, fueled by wine and loyalty to the man holding the mic. I scanned the 300 faces I had fed, whose birthdays I remembered, whose thank you notes I had pennied by hand. Every single one of them was laughing at me, being liquidated for $20 like a gag gift at a white elephant party. I didn't flee. I didn't hurl my champagne flute at his head, though a weary part of me yearned to. I simply stood there, spine straight, hands clasped, and let the farce play out. I had learned long ago that dignity is a fortress that no crowd can breach unless you hand them the keys. A paddle went up near the back, a joke bid of $20, more laughter. Then the temperature in the room plummeted. $2 million. The voice was calm, unhurried. It was the tone of someone who had never needed to shout to command a room. Every head swiveled toward the entrance. Gregory's hand slid off my shoulder as if it had been shocked. I found him in the crowd, a tall man in a charcoal suit, studying me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It wasn't pity, it wasn't amusement, it looked almost like reverence, which baffled me more than anything else that night. I had never seen him before. Gregory sputtered something about a generous donor, but no one was paying him attention. The man in grey began walking toward the stage, the crowd parting as if he were the only person in the room. For reasons I couldn't articulate, my heart began to pound. Not from fear, but from a terrifying sense that my life was about to pivot, and I had no say in the direction. He stopped a few feet from the stage and looked at me like a man who had found something he had been hunting for decades. Up close he looked older than I had initially thought, perhaps 60, with silver at his temples and a stillness that made everyone else seem noisy. He didn't acknowledge Gregory. His focus was entirely on me. "My name is Daniel Whitmore," he said. I heard a collective gasp ripple through the crowd, a name that apparently meant a great deal to everyone except me. "I apologize for the intrusion." Gregory found his voice first, stepping forward with that salesman's grin, extending a hand. "Daniel Whitmore, we're honored. We had no idea you'd be joining us. Your support for the foundation is—" "I didn't come for your foundation," Daniel interrupted, his voice still calm, but there was a steel edge that made Gregory lower his hand. "I came because I heard your wife would be here." The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in a glass 3 tables away. Gregory laughed nervously, glancing at me as if I could provide an explanation. "Have you two met, Angela? Do you know Mr. Whitmore?" "No," I said truthfully. I had never given Gregory a reason to doubt my word, and I wasn't about to start in front of 300 people. Daniel turned to me and his face softened. "Mrs. Simmons, I know this is strange. It isn't what you think." He paused, eyeing the microphone in Gregory's hand. "Would you allow me to take you to dinner tomorrow? I have something to tell you that doesn't belong in a circus like this." I should have said no. Every instinct I had cultivated over decades screamed no, to smooth things over, to protect Gregory's evening, even after what he had just done. But I looked at Daniel Whitmore and saw something directed at me that I hadn't felt in years, unashamed respect. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow evening." The whispers started before we were off the stage. I caught fragments as Gregory steered me back to our table, his hand pressing too hard against my spine. "Who is he? Does she know him? 2 million for her." I realized I had become the most fascinating thing that had ever happened at one of Gregory's galas, and for none of the reasons he would have chosen. He waited until we were in the car, the valet ticket still in his pocket, to ask the question boiling inside him. "Do you know him?" His voice was tight, careful. "No, Gregory, I told you the truth. I've never met him." $2 million, Angela. For a joke, that's not normal. People don't do that." He gripped the steering wheel like it had insulted him. "Did you run into him at the pharmacy, the grocery store?" "I have no idea who he is," I repeated, though a part of me had begun to turn the night over, searching for the hidden side. He didn't believe me. I could tell by the silence that filled the car, and by the fact that once home he retreated to his study instead of coming to bed. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying that voice. $2 million. I tried to place it in my memory. It wasn't there. I genuinely had never met the man. What I didn't know, lying in that bed with the study light glowing under the door, was that Gregory had already called his assistant from the car. I didn't know he'd asked her to dig up everything on Daniel Whitmore, his businesses, his marriages, and most importantly, any link between his name and mine. And I certainly didn't know that by sunrise, his assistant would call back with something that unsettled him far more than an affair ever could. Proof that Daniel Whitmore had been quietly searching for a woman named Angela Simmons for years. Daniel chose a small, secluded restaurant I'd never heard of, a place where tables were spaced for privacy, away from Gregory's usual haunts. He stood as I entered, a gesture I wasn't used to, and pulled out my chair. For a long moment after we ordered, he simply looked at me in the candlelight. "I want to apologize for last night," he finally said. "It must have seemed theatrical. It wasn't. I've been searching for you for years, and when I saw what your husband was doing, I couldn't stand by." "You still haven't told me how you know me," I said. "I've searched my entire life and I can't find you in it." "You wouldn't remember me," he said, "but maybe you'll remember someone else." He took a deep breath. 30 years ago, you were a young elementary school teacher. Do you remember a rainy afternoon at the bus station, a teenage girl crying? Something stirred in my chest. "There was a girl," I said slowly. 15, maybe 16, soaked through. I almost didn't stop. I had papers to grade, but she looked terrified. I bought her dinner at a diner. Her name was Rachel. "Rachel Whitmore," Daniel said, his voice catching. "My younger sister." I set my fork down. The restaurant seemed to vanish. She'd run away from our stepfather, Daniel continued. Things were unsafe. I was already across the country and I didn't know how bad it was until much later. Rachel told me she was planning to get on a bus and disappear. She didn't care where. She just wanted to be gone. He paused, and then a stranger sat down next to her in the rain and asked if she was hungry. I remembered now, staying with her past midnight, calling a woman from social services, sitting in a hard chair until someone reliable could take her to safety. I remembered visiting her at the group home, bringing books. I remembered losing touch as life moves forward. She became a lawyer, Daniel said, pride breaking through. Foster care advocacy. She built a national organization. She used to say it all started with a diner and a stranger who didn't have to stop but did. He reached into his jacket and placed an unopened envelope on the table. She died 8 months ago. Cancer. Near the end she made me promise to find you, to tell you she saved her life. I covered my mouth. I hadn't cried in that ballroom. Not through the laughter, the auction, my own husband's mockery. But I cried now in a quiet restaurant over a girl I had nearly forgotten. The 2 million wasn't charity, Daniel said gently. I didn't do it for your husband's foundation. I did it because for 30 years, everyone in your life has decided your worth without ever really seeing you. I wanted, just once, for a room full of people to see the truth. I wiped my eyes. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything tonight, he said. Just take this. He slid the envelope toward me. Rachel wrote it before she passed. I haven't read it. It's not mine to read. I held the envelope, understanding that whatever was inside would reshape my life. I opened it alone in the guest room where I'd been sleeping, unable to read Rachel's final words with Gregory's accusations echoing through the wall. The handwriting was small and precise, a lawyer's script. Kindness multiplies. It just takes a while to come back around. Attached were legal documents. Rachel hadn't just left me money. She had left me a seat on the board of her foundation, a controlling share of its direction, leadership, purpose, a say in where funds went to shelters, legal aid, and scholarships for kids like the girl I'd once bought dinner for. Downstairs, Gregory was constructing a different narrative. He'd hired a private investigator specializing in matrimonial cases. He was convinced, in the way guilty men often are, that Daniel and I had a history, an affair that explained 2 million and a private dinner. He wanted proof. What the investigator found instead rattled him more than an affair would have. He found teachers I'd worked alongside 20 years ago, who remembered my desk drawer full of granola bars for hungry kids. He found a widow named Diane, whom I'd visited every Tuesday for 2 years while Gregory was building his empire. He found former foster children who described a woman who showed up at their school plays because no one else would. He found a veteran named Harold who credited me with navigating the VA bureaucracy that had turned him away twice. None of it was dramatic. It was just decades of small, unremarkable kindnesses that had never surfaced at Gregory's dinner table because he had never once asked how I spent my time. The report landed on Gregory's desk the same week a video went viral. Someone, a guest with a phone, had captured the auction. By Thursday, the clip of Gregory holding that microphone, grinning, saying, "Let's start at $20, had been viewed millions of times. The captions were brutal. A late-night host mocked him. A women's advocacy account reposted it with a scathing caption. Sponsors began calling. Luxury developers quietly reviewed their exit clauses. A journalist reached out for a comment. I declined. Gregory came home Friday looking like he'd aged 5 years. It's everywhere, Angela, I can't stop it. I thought about Rachel's letter, the strange power of one honest hour spent with a stranger. The phone rang. Gregory answered, listened, and I watched the color drain from his face. The board wants an emergency meeting, he said, Monday morning. The board meeting lasted 90 minutes. Gregory told me about it in fragments. 7 directors sat around the long table in the glass-walled conference room he'd once been so proud of. None of them would look him in the eye. It was Bill Ashford, the eldest, who finally spoke. This isn't about the joke, Gregory. This is about what the joke revealed about who you are when you think no one is watching. 2 developers made their exit official. A hotel group pulled their contract. By Wednesday, the company had lost enough projected value that Gregory stopped mentioning numbers. He came to me with a television offer. A morning show wanted us to set the record straight. He'd already said yes. Just be there to smile, he pleaded. Tell them it was a joke, tell them we're fine. I looked at him for a long moment. I won't lie for you anymore, Gregory, not even you. He didn't yell. He just sat at the kitchen table, head in his hands. For the first time I felt pity for him, though not enough to change my answer. I called Daniel later, not about the interview but about Rachel's letter, the weight of responsibility. Take your time, he said. The foundation isn't going anywhere, but if you want to see what it does, I could take you to one of the shelters. I said yes. The shelter was a converted apartment building with cheerful curtains, a deliberate attempt to make temporary housing feel less like a crisis. Daniel introduced me to Priya, the director, a weary, kind woman who walked me through the halls. That's where I met Lena Brooks. She was about 28, sitting in a courtyard with a 4-year-old boy asleep on her shoulder and a slightly older girl colouring next to her. She had that specific exhaustion, the kind that comes from spending every ounce of your energy keeping 2 small people fed and unaware of how close to the edge things are. She looked at me with the guardedness of someone who has learned not to expect kindness. Something in her face reminded me so acutely of that girl under the bus station awning 30 years ago that I had to steady myself against the doorframe. I sat down next to her. I didn't pry. I asked if the children had eaten. When she said no, I walked to the corner store myself and returned with sandwiches and juice boxes. I sat with them as they ate, just as I once sat in a diner with a frightened 15-year-old. Eventually, Lena spoke. A husband who drank, a shelter 3 towns over that had no room, 2 months sleeping in a car. I listened without flinching. I left that afternoon having arranged through the foundation for her rent to be covered for 6 months while she finished a certification course. It wasn't a huge thing by the foundation's standards, but driving home I felt something I hadn't felt in years, useful, not decorative, useful. Gregory noticed the shift before I said a word. He noticed in the way I no longer waited for his schedule before making my own plans. In the way I stopped checking my phone for his approval. One evening, watching me come home late, energized from a foundation meeting, he murmured, "You don't need any of this anymore, do you? Me, the company, none of it." I didn't answer because I was still finding out. But watching his face, I understood he already knew. The invitation arrived in a cream envelope, the Rachel Foundation Gala. Keynote speaker, Angela Simmons. I called Daniel, half convinced it was a mistake. "It's not a mistake," he said, the smile audible. "The board voted unanimously. They want the founder's story told by the person who started it, whether she remembers starting it or not." I nearly said no. I had spent a lifetime serving from the edges, not the center. But I thought of Lena, sending me photos of her daughter's school project with joyful exclamation points. I thought of Rachel's letter. Kindness doesn't disappear, it just takes a while to come back around. I said yes. The night of the gala, I dressed alone in my new apartment, a small place I'd moved into 6 weeks after telling Gregory I needed space. I chose an emerald dress, nothing like the sapphire one from that other ballroom. I did my own hair. I didn't check my phone for approval. This time, when I walked into a room of 300 people, I wasn't beside a husband holding a microphone like a weapon. I was walking toward a stage where my name was printed on the program. Daniel met me at the entrance, offered his arm, and walked me in like an old friend, steadying your nerves. "Just tell them the truth," he said. "That's all Rachel ever wanted." When they called my name, I walked up, heart pounding. I looked out at the crowd, donors, board members, faces from the shelters we now funded across 4 states. I told them about a rainy afternoon at a bus station, a diner, a frightened girl I almost walked past. I told them I hadn't thought it remarkable at the time. And I said that I now believe that's the point. The kindnesses that change lives rarely announce themselves as important while they're happening. The lights dimmed. A screen came alive with faces. A woman in her 40s, a former foster child, spoke about a scholarship that made her a nurse. Harold, the veteran, spoke about the paperwork I'd helped him file. A teacher I hadn't seen in 15 years described those granola bars, tears streaming down her face. Lena appeared last, her daughter beside her, saying simply, "She sat with us. That's all." She just sat with us until it didn't feel impossible anymore. I found Gregory near the back, alone. He wasn't smiling his camera smile. He was watching still, the way I had once been still on a stage he built for me. Afterward he found me by the coat check. "I saw it all," he said. 27 years, Angela, and I never once asked what you did with your Tuesday afternoons." His voice broke. "I'm sorry, not the kind of sorry that wants something back, just sorry." I stood beside someone extraordinary and never looked up long enough to see her. I believed him. After everything, I could still recognize a real reckoning. "Thank you," I told him. "I forgive you, Gregory, but forgiveness isn't the same as going back." He nodded, accepting the shape of something he'd been trying to reshape for weeks. He let me say good night. I walked out alone into a cool evening, the quiet that follows something important finally said. Being alone didn't feel like a loss. It felt like a beginning. 6 months passed in increments too small to notice until I looked back. The foundation had grown. We'd opened 2 new shelters. The scholarship program now funded 30 kids aging out of foster care. Lena finished her certification and sent me a photo of her name badge, Lena Brooks, RN. I kept it taped inside my desk drawer, where I once kept granola bars for children I never expected to remember me. I had a purpose now that required no one's permission. Gregory resigned as chairman that spring. He told me over coffee that he didn't want to spend the second half of his life as a man who only learned decency after losing everything. We separated with grace, no courtroom drama, just 2 people finally honest, shaking hands like colleagues closing a long project. He asked if we could have been happy if he'd just paid attention sooner. I told him I didn't know, and that I'd stopped needing to know. That answer surprised him more than anger would have. On a quiet Sunday, Daniel and I drove to the cemetery where Rachel was buried, a modest stone under an oak turning gold. Daniel placed white lilies at the base. When he stepped back, I knelt and rested my hand on the cool stone. "You thought I saved your life," I whispered. "But I've been thinking you saved mine right back. I just didn't know it yet. It took 30 years for the debt to come due and I got the better end." Daniel put his hand on my shoulder. We stood together in the autumn light. Then I saw her, a young woman, maybe 19, sitting alone on a bench outside the gates, a duffel bag at her feet, arms wrapped around herself. She had that specific stillness, that specific fear. I recognized it. I walked over and sat on the far end of the bench. I asked the only question that matters. "Would you like to sit with me for a while?" She looked up, startled, wary, then something in her shoulders loosened. The cycle that began with a stranger and a diner booth 30 years ago started again, quietly, without an audience, without applause, without anyone keeping score. Sometimes people laugh while they decide your worth. They hold up the microphone. They set a price. They wait for the room to agree. But life has a way of settling the real account long after the laughter fades. And when it finally does, you learn the truth. Kindness is always worth more than those who mock it can afford to pay. I want to know what you think happens to Angela next. Does she ever open her heart to someone new, or has she found everything she needs in the life she's built? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. We have so many more stories like this one waiting for you. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a moment like this. Let's keep this journey going.